I was staying alone in my apartment one weekend while my roommate was out of town. The building was old, built sometime in the 70s, and had that typical faint smell of dust and old paint. It wasn't a bad place, just a little run down. Creaky floors, weak lights, and thin walls where you could sometimes hear neighbors talking or moving furniture late at night. That weekend was quiet, though. Everyone seemed to be away or asleep. I'd spent most of Saturday just reading on the couch, enjoying how peaceful it felt to have the place to myself. It was around 11 at night when the fire alarm went off. It wasn't the low battery beep or a quick chirp. It was the full alarm. Loud, constant, and sharp. I jumped off the couch, heart racing. The noise filled every corner of the apartment. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to figure out what to do. I didn't see or smell smoke. Nothing in the kitchen was on. The air was normal. After a minute, I figured it must have been a malfunction. The alarm had been on the ceiling for as long as I'd lived there, and the building was known for old wiring. I got a chair from the kitchen, stood up on it, and tried to reset the alarm. It stopped after I pressed the button, and the apartment went quiet again. I was just about to sit back down when I heard a noise. At first, it sounded faint, like something small brushing against the inside of the wall. A soft, uneven scratching sound right behind where the bookshelf stood. I froze, listening closely. The sound came again, a slow drag, then a few short scratches, like claws or nails scraping plaster. It stopped, then started again, a little higher up the wall this time. I stepped closer, staring at the spot. My first thought was that it was a rat, or maybe a squirrel that had somehow gotten inside. But the building didn't really have pest problems, and whatever it was sounded too heavy, too deliberate. It wasn't quick like a mouse. It was slow, steady. The sound seemed to move along the wall, toward the hallway that led to the bedrooms. I followed it without really thinking, moving carefully, trying not to make noise. When I reached the hallway, I turned on the light. The yellow bulb flickered once before staying on. The scratching didn't stop. It was still inside the wall, just beside the doorframe. Then, I noticed something. A small crack was forming in the plaster, right in front of me, near the baseboard. At first, it looked like a hairline crack, the kind you'd see in an old building. But as I watched, it widened slightly. Tiny pieces of plaster fell to the floor. I stepped back. The scratching grew louder, faster. Then another small crack appeared, higher up on the wall, followed by a faint popping sound, like the plaster was being pushed from the inside. My breathing got heavy. I didn't move. I just stared, waiting for something to happen. Another piece of plaster broke off and fell, leaving a small hole the size of a coin. I could see darkness behind it, just a shadowy gap between the walls. Then another hole appeared, a few inches away from the first. This one seemed to form quicker, as if something was pressing from the other side. My stomach tightened. I wanted to tell myself it was pipes or old wood shifting, but I could see the pattern. The holes were spreading in a line, one after another, moving slowly toward me. I didn't want to see what came next. I turned around, grabbed my keys, and walked straight to the door. I didn't even bother to take my bag or phone charger. I just needed to get out. When I stepped into the hallway outside the apartment, the air felt cold. The light above flickered faintly. From behind the door, I could still hear the scratching. I walked down the hall fast, then broke into a run when the noise seemed to move. Not just along one wall, but inside the others, like something crawling between the walls of every apartment. I didn't stop until I was outside, standing in the empty parking lot. The rain had started to fall, light at first, then heavier. I stood there under the awning, trying to calm down. The windows of my apartment were dark. Everything looked normal from the outside. No smoke, no movement, nothing. After a few minutes, I called the landlord. He didn't pick up right away, so I left a message explaining what happened. The alarm, the holes, the noise. He called me back about an hour later. I was sitting in my car by then, still parked in the lot. He sounded tired but concerned. He said he'd come by in the morning to check it out. I told him I wasn't going back inside until then. I slept in the car that night. The next morning, the landlord arrived around 9. I followed him up to the apartment. The hallway looked the same as before. Quiet, empty, a bit damp from the rain. Inside, everything was just as I'd left it. The couch, the book on the armrest, even the chair still sitting under the alarm. But the holes were gone. The wall looked completely normal. Smooth plaster, no cracks, no chips, nothing on the floor. I went straight to the spot by the hallway where I'd seen it happen, but there was nothing. I told him what I'd seen, step by step. The alarm going off, the scratching, the holes forming. He nodded slowly, then said he'd never had a single complaint about wall damage in the building. No signs of rodents, no water leaks, nothing like that. I didn't argue. I just stood there, staring at the wall. He checked it himself, knocking a few times and shining his flashlight along the baseboards. Everything looked normal. He told me to call if anything like that happened again. I said I would, though I knew I wouldn't stay long enough for it to. That night, I stayed at a friend's place. I didn't even go back for my things until a few days later, when my roommate returned. I didn't tell him much, just that I'd heard noises and that the alarm had gone off for no reason. He laughed, said it was probably rats or just old wiring. I didn't argue with him either. But what I couldn't forget was how real it all felt. The sound of the plaster breaking, the dust falling, the movement behind the walls like something shifting in the dark. It wasn't random, it was following a path right toward me. Months later, I moved to a new place in another part of town. It's a newer building, cleaner and brighter. But even now, I still get uneasy when I'm alone on weekends. Sometimes I'll wake up in the middle of the night and swear I can hear that same quiet scratching. When it happens, I get out of bed and turn on every light. I haven't told anyone the full story since then. It sounds crazy when I say it out loud. An alarm, scratches, and holes that vanish. It doesn't sound believable, but I know what I saw. The part that stays with me most isn't the noise or the holes. It's what I saw in the very last second before I ran. When the plaster first broke, and the hole widened just enough for me to see inside, I thought I saw something move. Something pale, like a hand, or the edge of a face, pulling back into the darkness as soon as I noticed. I didn't tell the landlord that part. I didn't tell anyone. Because once I saw that, I didn't want to believe it either. I'm a college student, and this happened about half a year ago. I still think about it sometimes, especially when I pass by the library at night. It was a Thursday, and I'd stayed late to study for an exam. The campus library closed at midnight, but students with ID access could stay in the main hall until 2 a.m. I liked the quiet, and I usually got more done when no one was around. That night, it was raining lightly outside, and most people had already left by 11. I was sitting near the center of the library, at one of those long wooden tables between the shelves. My laptop, notes, and coffee cup were spread out in front of me. Everything was calm, just the faint hum of the overhead lights and the occasional sound of the air vents clicking on and off. Around 11:30, I noticed the place had gone completely silent. I hadn't realized how much noise people make, chairs moving, keyboards tapping, pages turning, until there was none of it. I remember looking around and realizing I might actually be the last one there. Not long after that, the lights went out. It happened all at once. Total darkness. My laptop screen became the only source of light in the room, glowing across the desk. I thought it was a power outage at first, but then a few of the red emergency lights near the exits flickered on. They were dim, pulsing weakly every few seconds. The library felt different immediately. I sat there, waiting for the power to come back. After a minute, nothing happened. Then I heard something. It was faint, the sound of footsteps. At first, I assumed it was campus security. They did rounds sometimes, especially after midnight. But these steps sounded light, slow, almost hesitant. They echoed between the shelves, uneven, like someone walking without trying to make noise but still brushing against the floor. I called out, "Hello?" There was no answer. Then, the footsteps stopped. The only light came from the emergency bulbs, blinking every few seconds, leaving parts of the library completely black in between. Every time they flashed, the shadows shifted slightly along the floor and shelves. I stood up and looked down the nearest aisle, between two tall rows of books. Nothing moved. Just that dim red light flashing on the spines. I thought about packing up and leaving, but part of me didn't want to walk through the dark alone. I waited another minute, telling myself it was probably just a janitor or another student. Then the footsteps started again. This time, closer. They came from somewhere behind the row of shelves near the far end of the room. I turned toward the sound, straining to see through the gaps. I couldn't make out anyone, but the movement was real, slow, dragging steps, followed by what sounded like the faint rustle of clothing brushing against the books. I called out again, a little louder. "Who's there?" No reply. Only silence. I started walking toward the main doors. My heart was beating fast, but I tried to keep calm. The doors were glass, and I could already see the faint reflection of the red lights on them. When I got there, I grabbed the handle and pulled. It didn't move. I tried again, harder, still locked. That didn't make sense. The library doors were never locked when students were still inside. I even scanned my ID on the reader beside the handle, but the light didn't turn green. It stayed off completely. That's when I heard it again. Footsteps. But now, they weren't echoing randomly through the aisles. They were steady, moving directly toward me. I turned around, staring into the aisles between shelves. The red emergency lights flickered again, casting quick flashes of light down the long rows. In one of those flashes, I thought I saw movement, a dark shape, low and still, like someone standing just around the corner of the far shelf. But when the light blinked again, it was gone. I didn't wait to see more. I grabbed my backpack and walked quickly along the wall, keeping my distance from the center of the room. The footsteps didn't stop, though. They seemed to move in time with me, always a few rows away. I could feel the hair standing up on the back of my neck. The air was completely still, but my body felt tense, like I was being watched. Then, from the far end of the room, something shifted. A shadow moved. I couldn't tell how big or how far away, but it slid across the wall in the next flash of red light. It didn't look like a person's shadow, not exactly. It was too long, the movement too smooth. That was enough for me. I remembered there was another exit on the side of the library near the staff offices. It wasn't supposed to be used by students, but I didn't care. I started moving fast toward it, my steps echoing on the tile. Halfway there, I heard something else. A faint sound behind me. It wasn't footsteps anymore. It was breathing. Soft, uneven, coming from somewhere between the shelves. I didn't turn around. I just kept going. When I reached the side hallway, I found the metal exit door. It had a crash bar, one of those push handles. I slammed my hand against it. For a second, I thought it was locked too. But then I pushed again, harder, and the latch released. The door swung open with a loud metallic creak. I stepped out and let the door close behind me. I didn't stop moving until I reached the other side of the quad. The library looked calm from there, its windows dark except for the faint red glow inside. I watched for a while, half expecting to see something move past one of the windows, but nothing did. After a few minutes, I walked to the campus security office. I told them the power went out, that someone was still in there, and that the main doors were locked. They radioed it in and said they'd check it out right away. The next day, I got an email from campus administration. It said the library had been temporarily closed overnight due to an electrical malfunction. Power had been restored by morning. I went to speak to the security staff later that day. I wanted to know what they found. One of the officers said they'd gone through the building right after I left. They didn't find anyone inside. Every door had been locked from the inside, and the security system hadn't shown any signs of entry or movement. When I asked about the cameras, he said something strange. The recordings from that night were blank. Every camera inside the library had stopped working at exactly 11:32 p.m. The same moment the power went out. The feed didn't start again until around 1 a.m., long after I'd already left. No one appeared on the footage. Not me, not anyone. I didn't know what to say to that. The officer shrugged and said it was probably just a glitch, but I could tell he didn't believe it either. Since then, I haven't studied in the library at night. Even during the day, I never sit in the same spot anymore. I was babysitting my younger cousin Owen one weekend while my aunt and uncle were away. They lived a little outside of town, in a quiet neighborhood with only a few houses on the road. It wasn't my first time watching him, but this was the first time I'd be staying overnight. He was 6 years old then, a quiet kid who liked drawing and watching cartoons. I got there on Saturday evening, just before sunset. My aunt left me a list of emergency numbers and said they'd be back by Sunday afternoon. By 8:30, Owen was getting sleepy. I helped him brush his teeth, then tucked him into bed in his upstairs room. He wanted his nightlight on, so I left it glowing faintly in the corner and told him I'd be downstairs if he needed anything. After that, I went back to the living room, turned the TV volume low, and lay back on the couch. The house was peaceful. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the soft sound of the show playing. I remember checking my phone once or twice, then setting it aside. Around midnight, I started dozing off. The lights were still dimmed, the TV still murmuring in the background. Then I heard something. At first it was faint, a small voice like it came from a distance. It said my name. I sat up slowly, unsure if I'd imagined it. I muted the TV and listened. The voice came again, a little louder this time. "Hey, come here." It was Owen's voice, but it didn't sound like it was coming from upstairs. It sounded like it was coming from outside, from the front porch. For a few seconds, I just stared at the door, waiting to hear it again. Maybe he'd gone to the bathroom and wandered outside somehow, I thought. But I didn't remember hearing any doors open. I got up and went upstairs first, just to be sure. His door was closed, and when I pushed it open, he was right there, fast asleep, tucked under his blanket, breathing softly. The nightlight still glowed against the wall. He hadn't moved. I stood there for a moment, watching him to make sure. Then I quietly stepped back and closed the door. My heart was already starting to beat faster as I went downstairs again. When I got to the bottom, I could see the outline of the front door from the living room. The porch light was off, so the glass panel showed only darkness outside. Then I heard it again. This time it was clearer. "My name," said in Owen's voice. The same pitch, the same soft tone. "Come here, please." It was exactly how he spoke, down to the little pauses between words. I froze halfway across the room. My skin started prickling, and I couldn't bring myself to move any closer. It called again. "It's cold. Open the door." I didn't move. I knew Owen was upstairs. I had just seen him. There was no way he could be outside. But the voice kept calling, quiet and gentle, as if it knew I was listening. I thought about calling my aunt or even the police, but it felt strange. What would I say? That my cousin's voice was outside the door, even though he was asleep upstairs? It sounded ridiculous. I decided not to open it. Instead, I slowly backed away toward the couch, keeping my eyes on the door. The house was silent again. I waited for another sound, but there was nothing. Not a footstep. Not a whisper. After a few minutes, I turned the TV back on, just to have some noise. The voice didn't come again that night. Eventually, I sat there until I felt too tired to stay awake. I turned off the lights and went upstairs to sleep in the guest room across from Owen's. I didn't open his door again. The next morning, sunlight came through the window. And for a while, I almost convinced myself I had dreamed the whole thing. Owen came downstairs rubbing his eyes, asking for cereal like nothing had happened. I didn't mention what I'd heard. When my aunt and uncle came home later that day, I packed up my things, told them everything went fine, and headed out. But the voice stayed in my head. It wasn't just that it sounded like Owen. It was how calm it was, how steady. It didn't sound scared or desperate like a real kid would sound if they were outside in the middle of the night. It sounded like it was trying to be him, like it wanted me to believe it. A few months after that night, my aunt mentioned something strange in passing. She said their motion sensor light on the porch had started turning on randomly during late hours, even when no one was around. Years have passed since that night, but I still think about it sometimes, especially when I babysit alone. I always make sure every door is locked and every curtain is closed before it gets dark. And if I ever hear a voice calling from outside again, I know one thing for sure: I won't open the door.